Lucha-Masks.com by Pro Wrestling Revolution, bringing you, in partnership with Masked Republic, the Lucha Brothers, as well as Japanese legend Ultimo Dragon. Go to Lucha-Masks.com and fight Lucha Strong with masks from your favorite Lucha legends and Pro Wrestling Revolution luchadores. Stay safe in style and represent your favorite luchador. Get yours now at Lucha-Masks.com, powered by Pro Wrestling Revolution.
You are listening to the Lucha Central Podcast Network. And now, LuchaCentral.com presents The Business of the Business.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of the Business of the Business podcast, an inside look into how officially licensed merchandise of your favorite stars, be it wrestling stars or other stars, gets made. My name is Kevin Kleinrock, and for the past 25 plus years, I've been working inside of the professional wrestling industry on just about every level imaginable, from promoting very, very small shows to writing and producing television to selling a series to MTV called Wrestling Society X, and most recently, over the last decade, teaming up with my business partner, Ruben Zamora, who had a company called Masked Republic that focused on Lucha Libre, and at the time was making Lucha Libre masks and gear for the stars. And Ruben had also been a luchador for a bit and was a Lucha Libre promoter. We shared a lot of the same sensibilities and desires and formed together, and I joined in Masked Republic. And at the beginning, we really started with how do we help the luchadors and help the fans outside of Mexico get officially licensed merchandise. And at the beginning, it was really very simple. We were making deals with talents like Psychosis and Damien Seis and Conan, and we were creating designs, silkscreening t-shirts, or working with partners to silkscreen t-shirts, and we started a website called luchashop.com, which is still up today and still sells merchandise today. And that was kind of the business model back then, because as most people are aware, the culture in Mexico, and this is not a knock, this is just kind of a fact of the matter, is that bootleg culture is very prevalent. And luchadors show up at arenas, and outside of the arena, people are selling their masks, people are selling t-shirts of them, and it's just kind of been a given part of the culture. But we really wanted to teach luchadors about their intellectual property rights, and we also wanted to help fans be able to have access to officially licensed merchandise, because we really do find that if there is an officially licensed product, then fans will tend to purchase that officially licensed product. And if there is not one, then they're going to buy a bootleg product because they still want a mask or a t-shirt or whatever the case may be of their favorite luchadors. So we started that about a decade ago. But then about 4 years ago now, we wanted to kind of take that licensing game to the next level. And we looked at what was going on out there and what WWE was doing and other, quote, major promotions were doing. And we kind of thought, well, why can't we do that? Why can't we create a brand that represents luchadors and goes out and finds more than just t-shirt deals for them? Let's go find toy deals and calendars and books and accessories. And so we formed a brand called Legends of Lucha Libre. We went out and we found ourselves an agency in Firefly Brand Management, and we started building this Legends of Lucha Libre brand. And through that process, we have not only created a number of products, not only do we have another dozen deals or so that aren't even public yet because of how long it takes to make officially merchandised product, but we've also learned a heck of a lot about the industry. And there are a lot of unique intricacies to not only creating officially licensed products, but creating officially licensed products for living human beings. Because look, it's complicated to make any kind of officially licensed product. That's not to say that, if you wanted to do an officially licensed Star Wars product or an officially licensed, whatever your favorite television show may be product, that there aren't very complex details into getting that done. But in the end, there's one brand manager or one entity that controls all of those characters. And so if you're going to do, let's say, Star Wars action figures or Star Wars comics, at this point, you're dealing with somebody at Disney who is in charge of that brand. And actually, on a future episode of this show, we will have a former high-ranking Star Wars licensing executive on this program and talk about that world as well as their role now in the wrestling world of licensing. But my point here is that there's a big difference between licensing fictional characters and licensing real-life living, breathing human beings who are going to have their opinion about how they should be represented and how they want to see their products made. And so there's a really unique area of licensing that goes beyond just let's put a IP on a product. And that's what we hope to bring you with this show. And then after you've listened, please definitely give me your feedback. You can find us on social media at Masked Republic, MASKED Republic. You can also send feedback to Lucha Central and also leave us feedback on your favorite podcast platform, along with please subscribe, rate, and leave that feedback in the review. And with that, I'm going to take us to part one of my interview with Jeff Everett, also known as Rockets Are Red. So enjoy. With me now on this first episode of Business of the Business, I am very pleased and honored to have Jeff Everett, known to others as Rockets Are Red. And he is a designer, illustrator, author, and he has done a lot of cool work, some of which you've probably even seen, even if you don't know that it's his. So thank you, Jeff, for joining us on the show.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. I feel honored to be your first guest. I guess you're slumming it until you get a bigger audience.
Not at all. Not at all. No, I think that despite the fact that neither you nor I can remember exactly how we met or when we met, we know it's been about 4 years now, and I have both become a fan of your work and you have become a favorite collaborator of ours. So, we'll get into what we've done together a little bit later, but I really kind of wanted to get back to the beginning of deciding that design and illustration was going to be your career, because as somebody who at the age of 40 plus still cannot draw a stick figure to save my life, I have always been very, very much in awe and inspired by those who actually have great artistic skills. And, so I just kind of wanted to take it back a little bit from, I guess, when did you decide that both you wanted to focus on art and design as a career, and when did you realize that you actually could because you had the skills to do it?
Well, I always wanted to be an artist from a really young age, and my parents were very supportive of that. I loved growing up a lot of the old Mad magazines. I loved reading the comics every Sunday. I'd go through them, and back when you actually thought Garfield was funny, I would find all that stuff, and I would, find inspiration in that. One of my biggest influences was an artist named Edward Gorey, who he's most probably well known for doing the intro to Mystery Theater on PBS, which saying that out loud sounds so snooty, but he would do these really beautiful, ornate, intricate pen and ink drawings of like kids being killed and eaten by bears. Yeah. He has this whole it's like the Gory alphabet, and it's like A is for Amy, who fell down the stairs. B is for Basil, assaulted by bears, which is hilarious. And I found out later he did a whole bunch of illustrations for a series of books, which I'm actually reading now to my kids. I'm trying to mess them up as much as me. And all the books take place in the same town where my grandparents lived. So, like, you know, they'll be talking about like graveyards and witches and all that, and they'll mention like St. Michael's Church, and I'm like, I know exactly where that is. So art has always been something that's been around me. I ended up going to school in Washington, D.C. I ended up going to an art school. And I remember meeting all the other fine artists there and having that moment of realization of like, wow, there's a lot of artists out there all trying to make money. None of us are all that good. And we're spending this much money to basically go and paint all day. I need to figure out how to make money because I need to survive. You know, I had supportive parents, but it was also a very well understood of like, we're going to help you get through college. You still need to help yourself get through college. And when it's done, it's done. Like no trust fund, no nothing. And so at the school I was at, there was a big divide between fine art and graphic design. And doing graphic design was considered a sellout. Mostly because it was considered, and I think from a very egotistical standpoint, the fine artists considered their thoughts and their emotions and their concept of the world to be the most important thing, so that they have to go and force their opinion on everybody. And then you're so grateful for it, you'll end up paying them. And I say that because about 90% of the people I met there were idiots. And they would say things like, I'm going to paint my entire room pink. And it's to show the oppression of masculinity. And you're just like, yeah, okay, yeah, whatever. That's cool. And I remember walking down a hallway and a kid vomited all over himself. And he looked down. This was the big key for me. He looked down and he kind of looked at it, and then he smeared his hand in the vomit and wiped it on himself. And then he went, cool, this is my homework assignment for today. And went off to class. And at that point I just said, I'm going to become a designer.
And we'll be back in just a moment with much, much more with Jeff Everett as we get into his work as a professional designer, his work for agencies, his work for the government, and starting to get into his work for rock and roll bands and professional wrestling. But right now, I want to throw it over to Denise Salcedo at Lucha Central to tell you about all the other podcasts coming to the Lucha Central Podcast Network this week.
Hey everyone, it's Denise Salcedo here in Lucha Central with a look at all the great shows available this week on the Lucha Central Podcast Network, where you can find each show on its own or subscribe to the Lucha Central Podcast Network for every show in one easy feed. Just like the last 2 Mondays, this week we bring you the debut of one more monthly series, this one called The Business of the Business. Hosted by multi-decade wrestling writer, producer, promoter, and current Mass Republic president, Kevin Kleinrock. The series will take listeners into the inner workings of how officially licensed merchandise is made. This week on the show, graphic designer and illustrator Jeffrey Everett, who's created works for everyone from Seth Rollins to Rollins Band, and from Pentacero M to the Pope. Yes, the Pope. This is a series you are not going to want to miss. Tuesday's Mats, Mask, and Mayhem takes you back inside the temple as they get inside Lucha Underground Episode 3. If you're in the United States, you can head to Tubi.tv, where you can watch each episode of the series in advance to each week's MMM show. Don't miss the insider perspective from those who were there on set as the very first season unfolded. Thursday and Friday, we have you covered in both English and Spanish. First up, on Straight Outta the Bodega, Papo Esco, Gabriel Ramirez, and Kevin Kleinrock continue their conversation on a number of California scenes, wrestling promotions, and businesses. And on La Mesa de los Márgaros, CMLL luchador, member of the legendary Casas family, son of Felino, Tiger Casas, pulls up a seat around the table. On Friday, the Lucha Central Podcast Network brings you Lucha Central Weekly and Lucha Central Weekly en Español. Get all the latest updates from Mexico and the most newsworthy notes on luchadores across the globe, including a look at what went down at AEW Double or Nothing, and the latest on Triple A's plans to resume shows. Be sure to subscribe and follow all your favorite Lucha Central Network series on your favorite podcast platforms. And please be sure to give a rating and review to help more fans find the shows that you love. For now, this is Denise Salcedo signing off from Lucha Central Central. Have a great week.
I like design because I'm working with somebody. We are sharing a vision and hopefully making something bigger than just, my simple thoughts or their simple thoughts. We're building a story. We're building a world. We're building something fun collaboratively. And so, I've been doing this for 25 years or so. And I've literally worked with the 4 presidents. I've worked with 2 popes. And then I've worked with Rey Mysterio and Pentagon Jr. So
it's quite the eclectic collection of people that you've worked with. I just want to take a step back real quick because I think some people listening might not really. I think especially because in 2020, I think if you're growing up, you don't really hear the words fine art very much. Can you just kind of give the listeners a brief kind of description of, I think, design and illustration, it's what we see on posters and it's what most, I think, quote, art today that people see in the mainstream is. But what exactly, or how would you exactly define fine art and the keys to the difference between fine art and, illustration and design?
I'll explain illustration and design first because I think that's the easiest one. I find design and illustration to be a collaborative process, and that can take multiple forms, which we can get into, but it is taking a person, taking a political stance, taking a product, taking a character, whatever, and interpreting it in a way that speaks to a larger audience. And in theory, it should have a definitive point of view. It should be saying something, and it should mean something beyond, oh, that's cool, man. It should be larger than itself. Does that always happen? No. Sometimes you just throw a skull out there because it looks cool. But for the most part, it is a collaborative process. Fine art. Now, let me just say, Paul Rand said it best. He's one of the most famous designers ever, which when you say famous designer, I mean, that's like saying famous hamburger cooks. I mean, who cares about famous designers, except for other designers? But he once said, I think what I do is art, and I think it's pretty fine, which is kind of how I view what I do. But fine art is basically usually an artist working in a medium where they are expressing their ideas only. And usually it costs a lot of money to buy it. It's usually hung up with a really nice frame. It's usually, I feel, very highbrow and looks down upon, say, commercial art or art that is meant to be consumed by the public.
So,
and saying all that sounds so snobby, but yeah.
But and this might be opening a whole other can of worms, because I'm guessing that these two are polarizing figures, even within those communities. But for the lay person, I guess, or for the average person listening, we're talking essentially the difference between going to the mall and buying a Thomas Kincaid in one of his branded stores, and it's a picture of a lighthouse or the ocean or whatever, and picking up something that Shep Ferry did, an Obey poster or some sort of a graphic design that's literally meant to be consumed by everybody who passes a billboard or sees something on the street. Is that kind of a good delineation?
No, because I
Okay.
think if you ask, I think, Kevin, you're wrong, and let me explain to you why you're wrong.
This is why I'm doing this show, right? I want to learn.
And I'm sure you hear that every day, and you kind of roll your eyes and hang up. I think of fine artists as somebody who would be considered pop culture, and it's not something that you would see in a mall. Like Kincaid is definitely one of those people where if you considered yourself a fine artist and you looked at Kincaid, or you even look at Bob Ross, you would consider them like illustrators, or you would consider them hack artists who are just churning out shit for people to buy. And to a certain degree, like Kincaid and Ross, though I think they're wonderful, like Norman Rockwell had the same thing where they did something very well, but it was definitely for mass consumption. Sure. And that does not sit well. Shepard Fairey is total design. It's illustration. It has a point of view, but he's one of those people, when he's not getting hired by a client, I definitely think it becomes that weird line between art and illustration design. I mean, when I'm trying to describe design, and it's just, of course, just comes to me now because I'm sleep deprived, it's the idea of art and business where it meets, and the little thin line between them, that's graphic design and illustration. Okay. It's just, they're not one or the other. They overlap just a little bit, it's not as soulless as an IKEA catalog, but it's not as, pontificating as the person rolling around in chocolate and spreading autumn leaves on themselves while screaming about the patriarchy.
Totally makes sense.
It's business and art combined. And, there are artists, I mean, it's like with music, like there are artists that you and I both love who have probably only sold 1,000 records, but we think are gods. And they will purposely try to be as, antithetical to pop music. And that's like the arty flavor. And then you have like Green Day, who can do kind of what they want and then sell 1 million records. They would be considered kind of the design, the business end of the music world.
Yeah. So I guess we kind of already covered what my next kind of question was going to be, which is, on your own kind of bio, you describe yourself as a designer and an illustrator and an author. So just kind of wanted to touch, what do you see as the key differences between the designer role and the illustrator role?
Illustration is really being able to just draw something aesthetically pleasing. It's to capture a mood or capture a story, capture the likeness of a product or a person. Design brings in how you use type, how you use production, how you effectively translate other pieces that go on to the finished piece to help highlight what you want to make the message. Like if you are working with a death metal band and you have a picture of 37 virgins being sacrificed using the typeface Futura, which is like super slick and elegant, on the cover is not going to look good. Unless you're the band Deaf Heaven, it's not going to look good. It won't go. And that's where the piece of design really kicks in. For me, I was trained as a designer. I don't really consider myself a very good illustrator or a very good, artist. I can't just pick up pens and draw something incredible. It's a very labored effort for me. Like when I watch on Instagram, it's like, I'm going to draw this comic book character in 45 seconds. And you watch it and it's fucking amazing. And you're just like, oh, fuck you, dude. Like, cause you're making it look so easy. So then when people come to me and want to hire me to draw something, and I'm like, yeah, it's going to take me like 40 hours to do this poster. People go, yeah, but I saw the dude on Instagram do it in 30 seconds. Well, go fucking hire the guy who did it in 30 seconds,
Yeah.
So,
well, and I think,
with design, it's a whole field onto itself. Designers can sometimes illustrate, which is, kind of where I am. But illustrators as rarely are good designers because it's two very different ways of looking at the world. And when I've seen illustrators go like, oh, I can design. I go, I mean, you know how to use the program, but that sure as hell does not look good, So it's mastering two different fields and hopefully being okay in one and being really good in the other.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, and that makes sense in terms of, especially, and obviously we'll get into it a little bit later, but like our relationship and how you've worked with Master Republic, where, sometimes I'll have an idea for something and take it so far as, okay, I can, maybe sketch it out on paper in terms of like my initial idea for a layout, or maybe I can jump into Photoshop and I'm just going to use Futura or Times New Roman or whatever. And I'm going to go, here's the basic idea. And then I send it to you. And like, a week later, we have something absolutely amazing back. And it's like, okay, now this is designed. This is a work of art. This is something we can put out to the public. And so I completely get that designer element, but I don't think I've ever really in the past thought about the real kind of differences. I definitely want to talk about the fact that you really have different pockets of clients that you work with. You have your entertainment clients, you have your corporate clients, you have your nonprofit clients. But I think because we're going to focus this podcast on officially licensed merchandise and that kind of complicated process of creating officially licensed merchandise, whether it be for living, breathing people or whether it be for just a iconic brand, I kind of want to jump into your first commercial work. So you get trained, you go to school, you learn about design, and what was really the first commercial piece of work or job that you had after you finished your training?
So I graduated from American University in DC, and I transferred out of the art school. Thank God, because I realized that in order to be successful in the world, you can't just live in a hovel creating art with sticks and glue. You have to be able to communicate, which I'm barely functioning at. You have to be able to learn how to read and write properly. You have to learn how to relate to people. Again, I'm mediocre at all these things, as you can tell right now. But when I left AU, I ended up working for 3 or 4 years at a public relations firm in Washington, D.C. And when I first got hired there, I had a really great boss named Melinda, and she would really try to push for good ideas. And we got to do work for the Clintons, who was president at the time. We got to do work with like environmental groups. We got to do a lot of, as I'll say, feel good, do good kind of work. But a lot of it, none of it was illustration based. It was all just, newsletters, publications, annual reports, advertising, things like that. And during that time, I was still doing my own pen and ink work on the side. Now, while doing all this, you kind of learn as you go that if you do nonprofit graphic design, your next job will be with a nonprofit group or another place doing this kind of work, because you don't work for a nonprofit and then go work for a skateboard company. So after 4 or 5 years, I ended up realizing I'm going to shoot myself in the face if I keep doing this kind of work, especially because a new boss came in, and the new boss was definitely one of those, old boys kind of network. Like if you watch the show Mad Men, they all took that shit really seriously, where it's like, we're going out for, martinis at lunch and shit like that. And I was just not into that. I was really into, the punk and hardcore music scene in DC. I was into fucking weirdo comics and movies and things like that. And just, I didn't feel right there. So I ended up moving to New York City to go to the School of Visual Arts, which had to get my master's degree. And their master's degree program was called Designer as Author, which later kind of revamped to Designer as Entrepreneur. And it was this idea of, like what Jay-Z said, I'm a business, man. And that's, what really led me into doing work for musicians, doing work for wrestlers, doing work for just crazy people such as yourself. And it really made me appreciate, again, people like you who just figure out a passion and go do it. And it may not be successful right off the bat, but there's the mentality of, I'm going to do this. Someone's going to find it and love it. And that took off big time in New York.
So I want to, before we get too far ahead, and I guess it kind of actually, I'm jumping ahead where I had originally planned to, but you talked about working for the PR firm and working on a piece for the Clintons. So let's talk, because in the core of this show really is about how do you create officially licensed works with the approval of the people that own the IP or are the IP. So walk us through that a little bit. What was it like, or what was the process like creating something for the Clintons, and how did that go compared to some of the other jobs that you've done where you've had to create for someone who maybe wasn't as important or powerful as the president of the United States?
I'll take it a step further because I can remember this one really well, and there's a good story in this one. So I actually did work for the Pope, and it was the Pope that had the red shoes. Can't remember. I'm obviously not Catholic, but it was the one before the current one that we have now. And he was coming to Washington, D.C. to give a mass, to have a meeting at one of the huge ass stadiums that we have here. And we got contacted about 3 weeks ahead of time. And when I say this is not my company. I was working for somebody, and they hired me to help with this. And you figure, like, when the Pope is coming, this is like something that gets planned, 6 months, a year, multiple years ahead of time. So you'd figure, like, oh, graphic design, maybe we should start talking about that at the beginning. No, sure. It was like a month ahead of time. And it was, we need a logo. We need to do
you need a logo
banners.
For the Pope? The Pope needed a logo, or the appearance needed a logo?
Both. So the Pope needed a logo that they would show while he was doing his benediction or whatever it was. And this symbol, it was specifically for the event, but it would be on like banners. It would be on signage. It was on Metro cards, our subway. In DC, our subway system doesn't have tokens. It has like a little card system, so you have to swipe a card to get in. So like it was on that. It was on metro signage. It was everywhere. I mean, this is a huge event. And so with that, my job is to not only come up with a symbol for this event, it was also, we had to create a symbol that can be used small or the size of a truck. And a lot of that takes up, it's a lot of learning how to think and scale. And so the approval process actually went really quickly. We had to give 3 or 4 different versions, and then you go through 2 to 3 rounds of revisions. One of the things that I learned is that drawing a logo at 4 or 5 inches, when you blow it up to be 50 feet high, which is something that happened, you realize that little curve that's off by 1% really actually matters, because when you see it huge like that, you go, oh shit, I should have done that correctly. So that was kind of embarrassing. So like the logo we came up with ended up being used. I remember like Tiffany's contacted us. Tiffany's the jewelry maker in New York. They were making, well, listen to this. This is really up. They were making silver dog tags with our logo on it. Now, just stop and think about that for a second. Silver dog tags. So people were paying like $150 for this dog tag. And dog tags are usually made for people who have died. Like they're for people in the military. So when they die, they could be identified. Like that's pretty up. I'm really glad I don't work for this company anymore, so they can't fire me. But like, so it was things like that. But what really stuck out for me was it was not a hard process. It went very smoothly, and a lot of that is because over the years, me, I'm fairly straightforward when I talk about expectations. If you contact me and you're like, hey, Jeff, I need this PowerPoint or I need this cover, I'll say, Kevin, I'll do it. I'll gladly do it, but it's going to take me a week. Please remind me in 5 days, because that's when I'll start working on it, Or when I'm doing rounds of revisions, it's like, this is round 2. We have a week left to go. If you need more revisions, I need them by tomorrow. And so having that type of open communications made it much smoother, compared to like when I work with like smaller bands or smaller clients, where it's like a very personal, very like, this is something I've been working on for 6 months and I want you to draw the cover for me. And the budget's like $500. Every single time, those projects are usually the worst, because it is such a passion project for these people. Whereas like with the Pope, it's just like, he's doing 50 of these. It's just another logo. Like, just get it done and don't have it look bad. And hopefully we'll sell a lot of teddy bears, The fun thing about the Pope project, which the punker in me always appreciates, is so his event was like either on his birthday or the day after his birthday. And so we got to design the birthday card for the Pope. Specifically, I got to design the birthday card for the Pope. And so the art director, the person I was working with, was like, the most pleasant person in the world, total lesbian, okay? And then you have me covered in tattoos listening to Slayer every moment I can while designing this stuff. And so like we would throw in like little jokes here and there. Well, hold on. I'll bite the bullet on this one. I threw in little jokes here and there. So like for the birthday card for the Pope, they wanted like a beautiful like night sky or something over the stadium. So I made every single star in the sky a pentagram, just to be like, yeah, like. So my childish nature really paid off well. No one mentioned it though. Then I got to sign the card that was given to the Pope. So somewhere in the bowels of the Vatican is my card gathering dust, slowly being infused with satanic spirits.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so back to the Clintons.
Okay, Clintons. All right, go on.
Oh no! So what was that process? Well, the Pope process was fascinating. I'm glad we got this story in there because I did not realize or remember that you had worked with the Pope. But so working with the president, though, or any president, because you've worked now under multiple presidents. What's that? Were you making a piece?
All but the current one.
That's quite all right. Were you making a piece specifically of them and with their likeness, or was it just for them?
It ended up being several reports that were being done in their name. And these are like huge ass reports that are like 400 pages long. And so they did have involvement in it, but it wasn't like I was going to go hang out with Bill and Hillary, at the White House. It wasn't anything like that. And then I also got to work with the presidential libraries doing designs for the Clinton not memorial, but for the Clinton Presidential Library. And so with that, like you get to see all of the behind the scenes stuff that happens with stuff that gets sent to the president, stuff the president signs off on, things like, if you in your 5th grade class, if you make a macaroni and glue on construction paper portrait and you send it to Bill Clinton, it becomes the property of the United States government. And they, by law, have to do everything within their power to keep it up to quality. So they have to do like conservation on it. And they have to keep it. They can't just throw it away. And I'm sure after a while they do, because I mean, stuff happens a lot. But like, I think Laura Bush got into trouble because she kept dresses that were sent to her from various fashion designers without paying what she should have paid for them. So there's a whole process behind all that stuff, and it is utterly fascinating.
That is fascinating.
I mean, if you think like the rule book to wrestling is large, the rule book to like, doing anything with the government is just stacks and stacks and stacks of like things you cannot do and like 5 things that you can do.
Well, that probably makes sense for the benefit of the rest of us. But that's fascinating. I didn't realize that a child's macaroni portrait of the president would have to be preserved. But that's I think now I want to make a macaroni portrait of a president and send one. Not this one, but maybe the next one.
You should. Well, no, like for this one, you'll just do spam and just send it to him. But no, seriously, like all that stuff needs to be kept. And so the one that was really fascinating was the Nixon Presidential Library. For many years was not part of the United States committee. It wasn't an official United States Presidential Library. It was just like the Richard Nixon Library, because you had these people there who worked there who believed that like Watergate was a setup. Nixon didn't do anything wrong. He was 100% in the right on everything. And it was all like the Democrats trying to take him down. And so their archives were like missing just a ton of stuff because they were just like, screw it. And they just got rid of everything. And so when they went back into the fold, or not back, when they went into the fold, the archivists were like freaking out because there was so much stuff missing. So I love listening to government people who are like really into their jobs and all about their bureaucracy, because one, there's such a dedication for public service through these people. Like, when people shit on the government, I think about these people who are just like, I love history, I want to preserve all this stuff. They really truly have an unfettered adoration for our country, and they just want to serve. And hearing them just get so into the weeds on stuff, it's like listening to like record nerds or like people who love like Andre the Giant. And they're like, Andre the Giant was slammed by Big John Studd in China when they did that one tour in 1979. So Hulk Hogan clearly was not the first one to do it. And you're just like, please keep talking because you're insane. And I love this. So
I'll because we are on the Lucha Central Podcast Network, I will throw out the fun fact that Hogan was slammed in Mexico by Canek before he was, Andre was slammed in Mexico by Canek before he was slammed by Hogan in the United States. So people can look that
excellent.
One up.
Thank you. Well, and that's why, like, dude, like I keep saying, I just want to like take you out for drinks one day and just like hear all your awesome wrestling stories. So I think you need to do like a podcast of just like Kevin remembers and just have you by like a crackling fire, drinking something alcoholic while I just sit there and pepper you with like, and then what happened? And then what happened? Because I think that would do really well.
My memory was up that. So I want to jump into this is great, but I want to jump into kind of the bulk of my topics here, which was your work in music and wrestling. But before that, because we've been on this roll about the government, I just want to jump to real briefly, if you're allowed to, talking about your current role, working with the National Institute of Health. And just this past week, this poster of Dr. Fauci that was released, I guess, and I saw it online and immediately recognized your work and your style. And so I guess just real quick, if you can, talk us through your kind of non-commercial corporate work and governmental work that you're doing these days.
So I ran my own design company out of my house for about a decade. And about 3 or 4 years ago, I legitimately had a client give me a nervous breakdown. And I just went, I can't do this anymore. And you get to a point, I think I was about to turn 40 or so, and I just went, I can't deal with this anymore, with people like threatening to kill my family over like $300. And so I ended up starting to work for the government because, one of my friends worked a contracting company for the government and literally he wrote a number, slid it to me, and I went, okay. And so I started working at I worked at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau for a little while, and that place was crazy bonkers. And then I left there, and the National Institutes of Health hired me in one day. They posted a ad. I've always liked public service, and I answered it, and legitimately within one day they hired me, and has been a wonderful experience. One of the things that people think about when it comes to government work is like it's usually very boring. It's usually very beige. And they specifically hired me to kind of bring a more youth-focused, cool, rock and roll, whatever you want to call it.
It was the tattoos.
Vibe.
It was the tattoos that did it.
I covered all of them when I got hired. And for like a month afterwards, I wore like, and this is like in September, which is still pretty warm in DC. I'm like covering up with like sweaters and stuff. And like I'd walk in just like drenched, like with like covered in sweat. And they'd be like, Jeff, why don't you just wear a t-shirt or a short sleeve shirt? And I was like, no, I'm good. And I was like, I need to get through this approval period of like 90 days or whatever. before I can show off all of my horrible, non-threatening tattoos. I'm covered in tattoos, and like they're like Adventure Time cartoons and like stuff that like there's a Usagi Yojimbo lizard. There's like, you know, black cats and
Well, don't you have
little
at least one or two tattoos that your kids have drawn?
I have more than one or two. I have like 15 on there, and they're horrible. And they're like, and they're like, I love them, but like they all look like prison tattoos because, like, you know, my like 4-year-old drew it, so it's like a little like Babam from Mario Brothers, you know, that's all whacked out, and I have this on me, and then I go talk to people who have Nobel Prizes, and they just kind of stare at me funny. And so I like when the COVID outbreak started, I was doing, you know, how to distance yourself from people. I did a poster about how to stay 6 feet apart from somebody on an elevator. And the way you do that is you get into a back corner, and then the person goes into the front corner. And that's how you remain 6 feet apart from each other. You know, I've done ones about, you know, how to keep up mental resilience during quarantine and how to reach out for help. And yeah, Dr. Fauci is somebody who is now a household name. And we would see walking in every morning to go do interviews like nonstop. And it's fun because you'd see him on TV, and we were making some of the graphics or stuff that he'd be showing. We helped make the backdrop for him, things like that. And so I started doing a whole series of portraits, just basically to keep myself entertained while I self-quarantine. And I did one for Dr. Fauci, basically because my mom asked me to. My mom has a weird obsession with him. And he does look like my stepfather, so I guess it's okay. But in the building that I work in, building 10, he's, I think, on the 14th level. That's where his office is. And so people, nurses, researchers, and all that started leaving like thank you notes. And so we managed to get to do a poster through my group. We did like a fairly large poster just expressing our appreciation to his service, because he is getting beat up a lot. And we put it up there, and people like have really taken to it. It got spread all over NIH, which is about a community of around 60,000 people. And so, you know, I think sometimes people forget that public servants, you know, they have a weird perception of us. He's a really amazing person and has done a lot for the betterment of America. And so, yeah, I actually ended up getting a thank you note from him. And it was very nice. It was like very dry. It was like something like your uncle would send you after like you give him a sweater on Christmas. And I loved it because I read it and I noticed there was a typo, which I thought was cool. I was like, oh, he misspelled very. You know, like who misspells very? And he signed it like, you know, thank you, Tony. And I was like, oh, now next time I see him, I can call him Tony.
You're in.
So, yes. You know, him and I are buds.
So between the adventures with the Pope and modern day, you really started doing a lot of illustration and design, I guess I would say, in the music world for a lot of bands that both I've heard of and others have heard of. How did that transition happen? How did you end up starting to work in the music industry for design work?
So, I mean, I've always loved the music industry ever since being a kid and listening to like Minor Threat and Black Flag and all those other bands, which is what initially brought me to Washington, D.C. There was a big kind of do-it-yourself DIY attitude that I always liked. I'd make my own zines. I would do my own artwork and just kind of put it out there. When I went to get my master's degree at SVA, one of the things for your thesis, you have to create a product. and you have to release it in theory. And so while other people were doing like, I'm going to be doing walking tours of the Gowanus Canal, or I'm going to make high-end sushi boxes that hold, samples of wine. I was like, this, man, I'm going to do a t-shirt company, and I'm going to just have it be super punk rock and have it be about wrestling and Dungeons and Dragons and things like that. And so with that, I had to learn how to do screen printing. And the screen printing class I took, which was like at 8:00 on a Saturday. When I say 8:00, I mean in the morning.
Yeah.
And it was like me and like 4 other people in this little dingy basement screen printing department. And the teacher was always clearly hungover from the night before. And he'd just be like, yeah, well, you need to screen print something. So just go figure out what the fuck you want to screen print, and then just come in here and screen print it. And I was like, cool, I'm down with that. Cool. And so at the beginning of this, like I was going to see shows all the time at like the Bowery Ballroom and the Mercury Lounge and Irving Plaza. And so Firewater, one of my favorite bands, was playing. And I just said to myself, like, I'm going to make posters for Firewater. And I ended up doing like 50 posters. I mean, they're horrible. I mean, they're not bad, but like, yeah, they're terribly done. And I did it so like I didn't have to like learn registration. I didn't have to learn anything. It was just like black. It was like black ink on white paper with like a varnish of black on top. And so like there's no registration, nothing. Like they all came out different on every single one. And I got in contact with the band, and they were like, hey, why don't you show up at the show? We'll get you in for free. And, give us a few posters, and then like whatever we sell, we'll split. And then we'll hang out afterwards. And I went, this is the greatest thing of all time. And, looking back, I probably lost money because I was like buying sheets of like Bristol paper, which is like really expensive paper, instead of like buying stuff in bulk. But like I had a great time. When you're 26, 27, and like you can go hang out with bands that you love and, get paid for it. Like, yeah, go do that. And so I started doing that, and I started doing it for like a bunch of bands. And I would just, the power of the internet, because like the internet was just kind of really becoming more accessible to people. And you would just write, 16 horsepower and be like, hey, I know that you're coming to New York. Can I do a poster for you? And here's the deal. And they'd go, sure. And you would end up doing a poster for them. And it was kind of very Wild West at the time. I made a ton of mistakes. But I learned a hell of a lot doing it. And then when I moved back to Washington, DC, I just kept on doing it.
I think that, it's funny because today there is an entire industry of top-end designers and illustrators, yourself included, who get hired by these agencies to create unique concert posters, to me, I'm not super into the music scene the way I was, in the past, but it seems like really in the last few years, maybe in the last 5 years, it's really become such a big thing to where you and other artists that we work with, like Urban Aztec and Pale Horse, you're getting hired, and Primus and this band and that band, 311, they want unique poster for every single night of the tour, and it's being done by these, known on some level artists. And it seems like you were kind of maybe a little bit ahead of the time, just deciding to do these unique gig posters, bands that were coming to town. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I think right now it's taken off really big, and that probably happened around 5 or 6 years ago. It got huge, and it's really awesome. But it also has its own kind of wariness and its own downfalls because of that. Like 10 years ago, 14 years ago, you could find people doing really cheap t-shirt companies. And so everyone started a t-shirt company. And now, like, none of those t-shirt companies are around. And that's kind of what doing gig posters is like now, where every young designer wants to do a gig poster. And it's like, oh, it's really cool. I got to do one for Foo Fighters, or it's really cool. I got to do one for Nine Inch Nails. But then you realize, like, oh, I spent 30 hours on this and I got paid $300. I would have made more money if I had just worked at 7-Eleven. And so there's a lot of really cool art coming out, and there's a lot of really amazing people doing some really killer stuff, but it's also like an industry that's slowly eating itself. And I wonder how much longer we're going to have with this before people just say it and end up leaving. I mean, I think I was probably the third or fourth wave of designers who started doing concert posters after you had like the original, like Frank Kozik and Coop and people like that.
I've got some of theirs.
Oh yeah. And you ask them, people like me are the ones who are killing the industry. And now, like, I'm the guy who's saying, like, all of these young kids are killing the industry. And it's true, and a lot of it's just because of we'll find somebody to do it cheaper. So why the should we hire you? And that has definitely happened to me quite a few times.
Yeah, I think that, even just on design and, graphic art, from my side of the table, right? The person that has to hire the designer or the illustrator. There are certainly times where, depending on the project, you do have to go, well, everybody's out there doing it around this price, but I can get it done super awesome at this other price. Does this project warrant, going one way or the other? And of course we all always want to go with the best art possible, but sometimes, depending on quantity and what people are putting out and how they're putting it out, there are those, economic questions as well. And I think, yeah, it gets hard because especially when there's, industries that don't really have unions to protect, bottom line pricing and things like that, it's certainly gonna always be a struggle. And that is the conclusion of the first half of my interview with Jeff Everett of Rockets Are Red. But we are about to get into a whole nother hour focused on professional wrestling, focused on his work of pro wrestling into his music posters, the work that we've collaborated on together, some of his other work within the pro wrestling and lucha libre industries. So definitely tune in to part 2. It's dropping right now as well. So just head back to where you got this podcast from, pick up part 2, and then we'll be back next month with a whole brand new guest and more of the business of the business. Thanks so much for joining us.